Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. If you're new to the channel, please be sure to subscribe now for future content. Please make sure you leave a like on this video, as it will recommend this video to so many more people for them to enjoy. If you want your story featured on an upcoming video, email me at thesinfulsavant@gmail.com. I will leave a link to my email in the description box below as well. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. This story happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s and was studying in Paris, France. I was going home from university. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day, I felt slightly uncomfortable. I could sense some guy looking intensely at me. I was used to unpleasant, unsolicited gazes, but this time, his gaze felt beastly. It's hard to explain why, but I felt like a prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually get off. Like I learned from the movies, I waited until someone else pressed the stop button and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him getting off the bus. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder. There he was, a few meters behind. I had the distressing feeling his eye had just looked away the moment I turned. I walked into a shop, took my phone and pretended to be taking a call. When I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as fast as I could. I kept looking back in the busy street. I zigzagged, crossed the street at every crossing. Finally, I believed that him getting off at the same stop as me was just a coincidence. When I reached my building, I looked back one last time, and there he was. His alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing the stairs 4 at a time. I reached the top floor, squeezed through my door, locked it, and froze. My intercom was ringing. Don't ask me why I picked it up. I regretted it the moment I did. I could hear the opposite flat intercom ringing as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping someone would open. But now, he knew my name. Gabrielle. Oh shit. I feel like a deer in the headlights, frozen. "Open the door, please," said a pleading voice. "I just want to talk to you." Somehow I couldn't move or speak. "Come to the window," he added. "Look at me. You'll see I'm not a bad guy." Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment in the building. I was not going to make that mistake. I hung up in shock. I waited by the door without moving for what seemed like hours. When I finally managed to calm myself, I called my long-distance boyfriend. "Call the police," he said immediately. Why didn't I call the police? I don't know. Today it would be the first thing I would do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was. I called my best friend instead. I didn't want to feel alone. I told her all about it, and after a while I felt better, safe. We started laughing. Suddenly the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I came home. I answered. "Gabriel," said the voice. "Open, please." I still remember the chills I felt. He was still there. He was there all this time. I was silent, petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation. "Gabriel, let me in." "I'm so thirsty," he said. "Just give me a glass of water." This broke the tension, and I hung up. Curled up in a corner, literally in recovery position, terrified. I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew he could hear me from the hall, but I was scared even to breathe. The intercom rang again and again. I didn't answer this time. I crouched to the sofa and fell asleep from exhaustion. I heard the intercom ring one more time in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning afraid to leave my apartment. I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note in my mailbox. "Gabrielle, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened for me." We immediately went to the nearest police station. The police listened and, of course, told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install DigiCode on the building the same day and wrote a message to each of my neighbors asking to not open the door to anyone they didn't expect. He sat in the cafe in front of my building with 2 friends every evening for more than a week. I never saw the stalker again. After this episode, I used a different route to and from university every day. I kept my phone tightly in my hand and looked back every few meters. Today, I'm still very observing of my surroundings. I never answer the door to anyone I'm not expecting. So people, if you ever find yourself alone in any kind of uncomfortable situation, call the police. Don't be an idiot like me. Be safe, everyone. This was back in 2013 when I lived in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college on the west side near Times Square. I was going through some tough times back then, as I was unemployed at the time. I had had a lot of time, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head time to time. One night, I was feeling especially depressed, so I decided to walk to K-Town to grab a drink by myself. I'm Korean, by the way. I walked into a Korean bar and got some weird looks from the waiter as I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a couple of soju bottles, I was feeling pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. However, as I was exiting the bar, this Korean guy followed me. He looked very normal, just like a nice Korean guy. He told me that he saw me drinking at the bar by myself and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I get home safe. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was very close, but he insisted and he looked so harmless that I decided to take him up on his offer. We walked 10 minutes, and it was quite pleasant. We were both a little drunk, but I remember talking about all sorts of things, nothing personal. When we finally arrived at my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. Now, my apartment was a 5-story walk-up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to open to get into the building. No doorman. I didn't think much of it and inserted the key to open the door and went inside. The door takes a while to close shut, and it was my mistake for not checking before I went up the stairs. While I was approaching the 2nd floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I literally got goosebumps all over my body, and I felt like I was in danger. As I started to pick up the pace, I heard the footsteps going faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor and started to run up, clutching my keys in my hand. The guy started to run up the stairs as well, and I can literally hear him getting closer and closer to me. This all happened in a couple of seconds, but it felt so long. I finally got to my floor, and as I tried to open the door, I looked back, literally saw the guy's head on the staircase. I rushed open the door, and I managed to close the door right in his face. My heart was beating so fast, and I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 a.m. and my roommate was dead asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything, so I decided to just go to my room and hope that he'd gone home. Around 7 a.m., my roommate woke me up. She said that there was a man standing in the front of our apartment door. My heart sank and I explained the whole situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed that we were going to call the police if he doesn't leave. I looked out the peephole, and he told me that he will only go home if I gave him my number. We then called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment, called me a few minutes later. She told me that she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently he tried to lie to the officers that I'm his girlfriend and that we got into a fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I do not have a boyfriend and that she doesn't know him at all. The police let him off with a warning. About 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it's the police. Surely it can't be him again. I answered the intercom and I was shook. It was him again. "Just give me your number and I'll go away," he said. I warned him that I was going to call the police again if he didn't leave immediately. A couple of minutes later, I heard ferocious knocks on my door. He must have gotten in when someone was entering the building. I was so scared at that point, so I immediately called 911. Unfortunately, the guy ran away before the police arrived. The worst part about this experience was that my roommate and I were so scared to leave and come back home. I would have anxiety every time I came home from work, worried that I might see him in the front of our apartment door. For about a week, the police escorted us when we felt scared. I never saw him again, but it was one of the scariest moments of my life. So creepy stalker dude, let's not meet. Before I start, I have to explain something. I lived 2 years ago in a house that had a terrace and a small parking lot 1 meter below the terrace. My room was upstairs and there was a door to the stairs that could be locked. I live in the south of France in the Pont Royal area. Everything was going well. I lived with my former father-in-law and mother. I was playing Minecraft in my room. For no reason, I look to the left towards my window, and I see a man standing there with a balaclava staring inside my window. I see an object in his hand, but I don't pay attention. I get stressed and I go to warn my mother and stepfather, completely panicked. They lock all the doors and it takes me a while to sleep and forget about it. Weeks go by, and 2 months after this stressful moment, the same thing happens again. This time I was playing Among Us, but I had changed my habits. I was always looking at the window to see if the man was there, and I was always closing the doors. So I see this guy again. Although I'm stressed, this time I'm really scared because I'm home alone. I leave for 10 seconds, and suddenly I don't see him anymore. I tell myself he's gone, but no, I hear a large noise at the front door, so I deduce that it has been forced. I totally stress. I take my phone, my keys, and my laptop in a bag, and I think it's about the situation, but I open the window and I go down the terrace. I went down to the parking lot, and I hear at this moment another noise coming from the inside of my house. Then a third one, and I see the same guy, and I distinguish the same object in his hands, which was a knife. I then start to run until I reach the house of a friend. I'm totally exhausted by sprinting, and fortunately he opens. I tell him with difficulty what exactly just happened. In the meantime, I call my mother and the security of the domain. Shortly after, I see the same car make several turns in the domain and pass 4 times in front of my friend's house. And at the second passage of this one, I recognize the man who was there a few moments earlier. And I see not only one person, but 4. 2 years after having lived that, I obviously moved in a bigger city, but moreover in an apartment in a quiet district, and my boyfriend now often stays with me. I've never shared this story, except strangely enough to my teacher at the time. I was in the 1st grade at Northside Elementary in DeSoto, Texas. We lived about 3 long blocks down, as my mother liked to call. I personally feel it was a lot more. My sister and I were brought to school on a regular basis and walked home. My parents decided to divorce right at this time. My dad moved out and we started seeing him every other weekend. My mom began dating someone else, and I remember she no longer became interested in taking us to school as much. She became very preoccupied with her new relationship, and I remember that she often had me walking to school as well as coming home. Thinking back now, I'm not sure why I was late. There might have been a doctor appointment or something like that. I remember that it wasn't very late at all, maybe just an hour or so after school had started. My mom pulled up in the car and I got out. I remember hoping that she would wait there to watch me go up the flights of stairs and inside, but she drove off immediately, to my dismay. And this is when I saw him. A man, pretty normal looking, stepped out of a car looking directly at me. My mom had pulled off and this man was the only person around. He crossed the street quickly, at an angle coming directly towards me. I remember turning and running up the steps. There were 3 flights of stairs with landings in between. When you're a little girl, these stairs seem much larger. I remember looking over my shoulder, and he was literally running up the stairs after me, and I had that horrible gut reaction and ran as fast as I could. I remember the double doors in front of me, and I was panicked, thinking I would not make it. At that young age, I felt the energy coming from this otherwise normal-looking person who looked like a dad. I remember the huge intrinsic feeling of doom and urgency to go through those doors, and I did. I immediately turned around and saw him standing on one part of the second set of stairs, and he just stood there looking at me, and he just stood there looking at me as I looked at him from inside the building. The man looked very frustrated and turned, walking away back to his car. I remember telling my teacher about the whole situation. Maybe a week or so later, a police detective showed up to interview me about what had happened. This makes me think it may be connected to something that happened in that area at the time. I don't think I've ever been that afraid in my life, and it was a powerful internal fear. It was like my body told me immediately to run to survive.